Last year, Miles, Schnick, and myself banded together to play the live service game Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. It was a thoroughly mediocre shooter at best, with finicky traversal mechanics, frustrating enemies, convoluted to non-existent leveling systems, a story of pure garbage, and downright embarrassing expansions. It died in less than a year, to no fanfare whatsoever, and put Warner Brothers in a deep, dark financial hole. And yet, it wasn't the biggest live service failure of 2024. And no, I'm not talking about Concord, the shooter that closed in 2 weeks. What if I told you that one of the biggest publishers in the industry put out a hotly anticipated online service game that actually topped Suicide Squad on Worst of the Year list, squandered even more potential, and might just be playing a part in collapsing an even bigger gaming company?
Yar, that game be Skull and Bones, the pirate game what lets you sack, pillage, and plunder their Weasley black guts out on the 7 seas with your own ship and a crew. Me hearties and I have been playing it last few months, and it'd be high time the scallywag be made to walk the plank because it's freaking terrible!
Seriously, 2 game sessions into Skull and Bones, we were re-examining how harsh we were on Rocksteady. Say what you will about Kill the Justice League, it functioned! It put some thought and effort into the multiplayer experience. It had structure and coherent goals. It had plot and a universe that was at least somewhat engaging, as opposed to this! So yeah, let's give this Drek a colonoscopy. First thing that simply has to be commented on is this screen when you first boot up. Ubisoft warning its players to make the game a safe ecosystem. I'm sorry, the crushing irony of that screen. Ubisoft, the company with well over a decade of credible allegations of systemic SE actual assault, actively protecting and rewarding actual predators, and perpetuating a corporate culture of exploitation, harassment, prejudice, and abuse, is lecturing us about a safe environment. Eat a dick! But then, irony blindness is the name of the game, since the opening cutscene talks about how piracy arose because evil corporations and unchecked capitalism made life hell for workers. So, the big evil corporation made a game about fighting big evil corporations. I'll be honest, my coverage of Suicide Squad was tinged with sadness because it'd be nice if Warner Brothers could survive executives that hate their own industry, but the world will genuinely be a better place after Ubisoft burns to ash and everybody diarrheas on the ashes. Anyway, the game begins with you thrown into a huge naval battle, laying siege to a big ship before being sunk by a British fleet. You wash up at St. Anne, a major pirate port, having racked up a huge debt to the local pirate kingpin. He lends you a ship, and it's up to you to vaguely work your way back up the social ladder of piracy, because this thing barely has a story or any kind of universe worth emotional investment. The funny thing is that Yahtzee's review implies that this introduction is new. The game used to start with you already shipwrecked and avoiding a shark in a dinky little raft. They had to go back and patch in a basic tutorial, just like prior such revealed titles as Left Alive and Hunt Down the Freeman. Alright, so what's the actual gameplay of Skull and Bones like? Well, you take your ship out sailing and get into combat with other ships. Hold the left trigger to aim weapons, push the right trigger to fire, and you can equip up to 4 weapons around your ship's perimeter so that firing from different angles uses different weapons. Once you sink a ship, you can loot whatever items that ship had aboard into your inventory. And that's it. No, seriously, I just described the entirety of the gameplay. You sail around blowing up other ships, and that's it. This pirate game has no combat on foot whatsoever. No gunplay, no sword combat, no swashbuckling, no nothing! You can go ashore at various ports, but the only things you can do on land are visit stores and manage your quests and your inventory. Wandering around shooting crap is the entire game. Well, that and slowly sailing around to your objectives, because even with a fast travel system, most of your gameplay experience will be spent sitting on your ass. Okay, not all of the missions are just about shooting other ships. You can plunder settlements by shooting all the ships in a small area. You can fight bosses by shooting bigger ships with stronger weapons and obscenely long health bars. There are battles with sea monsters that are piss annoying to hit because they stay underwater, so that a single battle took me about 15 straight minutes. Seriously, Ubisoft had the nerve to call this the first quadruple A game to justify charging $70 for a typically free genre, and it barely even has gameplay. I've seen NES games with core gameplay more complex than this. I could be playing Super Dodgeball right now! Okay, to be fair, there are about 7 different kinds of weapons you can equip, from cannons to long-range cannons to arcing cannons to flamethrowers, miniguns, crossbows, and homing torpedoes. What? Once you get a good enough ship, you can equip grenades. Alright, it's a bombard weapon that hurls rockets or bombs in an overhead arc, but they work just like grenades! You can hold R1 to brace because you have a shield for the odd times that you can tell you're about to take a hit. Weapons can inflict status ailments or do different types of damage, neither of which seems to really do anything. For all those flourishes, though, there's still no actual strategy to the combat. Either a fight is balanced to where you stand a chance, or it's not, and tactics, maneuvering, or weapon selection don't really feel like significant factors. You can stock up on healing items, which are their own little migraine, and you have food items to replenish stamina because your pirate ship has a sprint meter! Yeah, I know that the food is meant to be, like, feeding and refreshing your crew so that your ship can run at optimal condition longer, but riddle me this. How in the hell does drinking water increase your ship's top speed? That is a thing that happens! Somebody make it make sense! Seriously, Ubisoft took a pirate ship game and gave it grenades, sprint functions, stamina meters, and status ailments to resemble a default shooter as much as possible. Way to think outside, but pressed right up against the box, guys. The game's controls are complete crap, too. There's a huge lag to speeding up or slowing down your ship. You turn like a fat cow, and the wind and waves can easily knock you off course or slow you down if the game's in a bad mood. The other important thing to know about your ship is that it has a very strict cargo limit and an inventory with only 50 slots, which will necessitate stopping at port after damn near every quest to dump all the worthless garbage that you're picking up at all times. When you first get dropped into Skull and Bones, there are a lot of activities to do and a massive number of items constantly being thrown in your face. There are like 8 shops in the hub where you spawn, each one offers you side quests, and there are hundreds of different items to keep track of in your warehouse. It's honestly overwhelming getting thrown into the game blind and not having any idea of what to do. So I'll give you a hand. Most of the things you can do and find in the game are completely carking pointless. The shops give you side quests. Ignore them. You get so little cash and XP that they're completely useless. Dump every item that you don't use for core gameplay into your warehouse as quickly as possible. Either save stuff in case you need them for crafting later, or sell it off for quick cash. Commodities? Useless. They only do stuff if a crappy side quest asks for one. The vast majority of crafting items? Useless. There are dozens of materials and you'll only ever care about a few of them at a time. You can plunder settlements? Don't. You can get resources faster by just buying them. Plunders are only good for XP farming, and XP barely even does anything. Bounties give you decent money in a pinch, but they also spawn at random, so you can't count on them. Food? Pointless. You use so little of it that you just need a supply of 1 or 2 basic items on board, and you're set for hours. Seriously, at multiple points, I was carrying enough food in my helm to feed freaking Goku. Blueprints? Pointless. Just buy better equipment outright. Animal hunting? Pointless. Exploring shipwrecks? Pointless. Scrapping items? Pointless. The first step to maintaining your sanity in Skull and Bones is to recognize how much of the game is completely worthless bullcrap. We've been playing the game for like 30 hours, and I'm still finding items that seem to literally do nothing! Even player progression is a convoluted shit show. Blowing up ships and completing quests gains you infamy to level up, but leveling up doesn't actually make you stronger. Your level just determines which items you can use. Once you hit Kingpin rank, leveling up does nothing, and we all hit Kingpin rank before the story quests were even finished. Your ship's power is determined by its equipped armor and weapons, but again, there's a cap on how strong your equipment can be. You buy a single set of 420 power armor and some 130 power cannons, and congratulations, that's the strongest that your ship is ever going to get. Even better, the seasonal battle pass will give you all that max level gear for free to skip to the end of that grind in mere seconds. This is an MMO game. MMOs live and die on having an eternal grind to always get stronger. Instead, your ship has a power cap of 12 to 13 that you'll reach quickly, and grinding from that point onward doesn't do a damn thing. Oh, and the ship upgrades barely do crap too. Of course, you can always build and grind up a second ship, and a third, and a fifth, and a 16th, but again, why? Owning multiple ships doesn't actually do anything but micromanage the daily logins. The game is packed to the gills with systems that are completely freaking pointless! The game has a few quest lines to give some actual structure to the gameplay, and by a few quest lines, I mean that 2 were available at launch. And the term quest lines implies that the game has a story, which it does, in the broadest sense of the term possible. There are 2 pirate bases. St. Anne is ruled by a pirate kingpin named Skurlock, who's generic and boring as they come, and Telok Penjara is run by Rama, an admiral for her people of generic Boringston. Skurlock hates the French and Rama hates the Dutch, so you go on a bunch of generic, interchangeable, devoid of stakes missions fighting the French and the Dutch. You stop the French and the Dutch from forming alliances with the Sea People and the Farah, 2 generic warrior clans I couldn't tell you a thing about, and after you kill a bunch of the French and the Dutch, both storylines just cut off. Skurlock's quest ends with him setting you up to fight a rival named Karadek, whom you've never encountered and goes down like a bitch, and that's it. The story is so unimpactful and shitty that I swear to God, we didn't even realize when the game's main quest had ended.
Guys, I think that was the end of the main story campaign.
What?
Yeah, I see a letter.
Because the last line he said is, next time we cross paths, may the seas be less aflame. I think we just finished the story.
Well, there's a fucking surprise!
Oh my god! What?
Pretty please insert that clip of me doing the headbang on the pillow from Suicide Squad.
What?
You know, maybe the story would have been a little more engrossing if you ever felt like you were actually a part of this universe, if our character ever spoke, or if the story ever reflected that you're becoming a major pirate kingpin. Instead, the plot is just hours of bitch work for the other characters. Look, I'm sure that some abused intern wrote tons of lore about the factions and characters, but it's all so dry, exposited via flat, overlong dumps of information, all without a trace of character by actors that are barely awake. It's impossible to care.
Years ago, I was sailing with my crew and we had to choose. Face warships or the storm. We thought those sweaty red-faced colonizers wouldn't follow us in. So, we chose the storm. We did escape the...
And that's before the game's multiplayer is set up to where you miss loads of dialogue by design. See, only the group leader can accept a lot of the quests, meaning that multiplayer users miss crap loads of dialogue and it's gone forever. And that's only the beginning of how the game that desperately wants you to play multiplayer does everything in its power to bone the multiplayer. You can play the game in co-op with friends, and you can form groups with other players at will, but for a game that pesters you non-stop to play cooperatively, It does absolutely everything in its power to spite the co-op players. Everyone needs to constantly manage tiny inventories, which splits up the group as players have to keep detouring to random ports. The game doesn't give a crap if all the players are on the same objective, does nothing to stop players from breaking off to other tasks, and it won't even assign the leader's group focus to everyone. The game will constantly drop your assigned objective, throwing you out of sync with your team. The game glitched non-stop to where it didn't track quest progression evenly for everyone, forcing players to do confusing catch-up. Players will be distracted by all the ships you can fight, and loads of quests don't progress unless specifically the group leader talks to someone, stalling everyone else's game. Players will split up sailing around islands to hit their destination. Players can hike clear to the other side of the game world but still be treated as part of the group, meaning you still have stronger enemies balanced for the help of people who can't help you. And players can go ahead and clear objectives without their teammates knowing what's going on, which just makes co-op confusing as hell at all times. We were playing with a group of just 3 people, and it was a mess of constantly wondering what was going on. And that's not a dig against Miles or Schnick. The game is just hot garbage! Hell, there are missions where you dig up treasure by finding a map and wandering around a specific port until you trip over the chest. The treasure hunting sucks, but it gets worse, because if you're playing co-op, the same treasure will be hidden in different places for each player. One time, Schnick's treasure was buried at a completely different port from the rest of ours. Why does the co-op game hate co-op players? But all that said, one of the biggest and perpetual pains in the ass is that healing items have cooldowns. If you use a repair kit to heal yourself, you cannot heal again for 90 seconds, which is an ungodly frustrating hamstring during pretty much every single boss battle. And when you die, you drop loads of your cargo and you respawn with a gimped health bar, so it copies Dark Souls, because of course it does. I can only think of one reason why there's a time limit on healing, because the game has an optional versus mode. You can fight other players, and it'd be pretty futile if dueling players could heal up at will, so everybody is stuck with a maddening broken health system to cater to the few competitive players, because this unfocused mound of trash wants to be all things to all people, but ends up being nothing to nobody. And I have it on anecdotal evidence that the PvP player base is a toxic shit dump. Oh, but Ubisoft asked for fair play! Because the game is a modern live service, it has about a dozen different kinds of currency you're meant to keep track of. Silver is the basic currency that does everything and nothing at the same time. Gold is the premium currency that does nothing but buy cosmetics, which are sold as bundles to try and force you to pony up cash. Monster Teeth, Spirit Ashes, and Crystallized Tainted Wood are special currencies from specific quests that are used at specific hidden stores to get crap that's not even that special, and the game has rotating time-based currencies for special markets that come and go. In our time, I saw Silver Lions and Azurite Gems. I don't even know why money is made confusing. You can't pay real-world cash for most of them. Ubisoft just can't help but jam a crap mobile economy into everything they touch. The game has at least 2 more currencies called Sovereigns and Pieces of 8, which are tied to the game's daily login quest. Because yes, the crap live service tries to force you to log in multiple times daily. Both hub worlds have a bar called the Helm, where you can go and take on supply runs to pick up sugar and poppy. Then you take them back to the hub worlds to refine them into rum and opium. This runs on a time gate. Once refined, you can take on smuggling jobs to trade rum and opium for pieces of 8 to spend at the black market. The game also tracks pieces of 8 on a global leaderboard to dole out sovereigns. Supply and smuggling runs are limited and refresh daily, but once you've done a few runs, you can build manufactories that produce pieces of 8 automatically, but the manufactories require a dump of silver, and then they only produce pieces of 8 for a limited time, meaning that you have to log in multiple times a day to keep topping off your facilities and to sail around to all your manufactories to pick up their cash. You also just can't take over any manufactory anytime that you want. A few will be put up for grabs at random every half hour. So if there's a specific site that you want to complete regions or trade routes for bonuses, then you need to log in every half hour until the one that you want is available to take over. And the game threatens that your manufactories can get attacked, bluffing you into staying online so you don't lose all your stuff. And funding your manufactories takes a shitload of silver, meaning you'll have to grind general pillaging for the cash to keep things flowing. This system is evil! I don't want to play Skull and Bones, but I have to every day, or else I get screwed out of rewards that I've earned! Especially because all the manufactories reset once a month, forcing you to use them while they last before the whole blasted cycle starts over again. And the sickest part to all this rigmarole, you do all this crap to get a currency called sovereigns that are borderline useless! You can only use sovereigns on cosmetics and equipment that's worse than the other stores because the game has so many storefronts that they start cannibalizing each other! We played this game over a year past its initial launch and over a year of the live service constantly being patched, updated, and maintained. This piece of shit still broke down on us constantly. Not since Superman 64 have I encountered a major bug every single time I turned the game on. Game-critical items would repeatedly fail to appear, rendering missions unwinnable. We couldn't talk to characters to advance quest lines. The game at times just refused to let me board my ship, meaning I just couldn't play anymore. We'd take on missions and the game wouldn't populate objectives correctly, meaning you couldn't make any progress. My controls locked up. They quit letting me talk to people at port. Objectives would be marked at the wrong places. I'd get frozen at shops and unable to do anything, or get frozen while boarding a ship with enemies still freely shooting at me. Game-critical items wouldn't interact correctly or wouldn't be marked as interactive at all. The world would despawn. There'd be server disconnections out of nowhere. Multiple times I got stuck on loading screens that never went away. One mission had Miles and I just spontaneously read as being out of bounds so that we died for no reason, and then Miles died at least 3 more times in a row to this glitch before the game finally started working again. I ran across an anonymous dinky little level 1 ship that wouldn't take any damage. Crew members just abruptly decided to float off into the sky. Characters would just freeze in mid-ramble or forget what they were going to say and just stand there. We'd get massive loot drops out of nowhere. Our ships can fly! Or better yet, they can turn invisible! Okay, Schnick bugged to be invisible in Suicide Squad 2. What the hell? And you know how Miles was always getting stuck in the environment? Can't do that if there is no environment! Story quests that we had completed hours ago suddenly reappeared and they didn't work because they weren't supposed to appear in the first place!
Are we actually done with this game now?
You
Yes.
all are. I'm going to plow through the expansion that launches tomorrow for the video.
Good.
How appropriate is it that the very last thing we experienced was a game bug?
Yes!
And of course, there's my personal favorite glitch. Apparently I was playing as Nightcrawler! And that's only the stuff that explicitly doesn't work right. That's not even touching all the boneheaded design decisions that are there on purpose, like the hub worlds packed with so much dead air that they're balls confusing to navigate, or how you can't dock to maintain your ship because some random enemies just decided to attack and stalk you on sight, or how you periodically won't be able to use a shop because other players are standing in front of it, and the use shop button is the same as the invite complete stranger to join your playgroup with no way to cancel it button! Across the game's 4 expansions that launched before we started playing, Ubisoft has added a ton of world events, activities that spawn in the overworld, and you'd think it would be praiseworthy for a live service game to keep adding activities for players. Too bad the world events run on dumbass troll logic. The absolute least of the problems is that if you sail anywhere near a world event, the game will immediately drop whatever objective you're tracking, forcing you to sail out of the event and bungle around your journal getting back to your objective. But you see, many of the world events are boss battles, and several times the game would randomly spawn a boss while we were in the middle of a quest. Literally, you're in the middle of a completely unrelated mission for a storyline, and the game just goes, oh, by the way, this lightning dragon's here now! It often happened that we'd be fighting a boss for a main storyline, and then a second boss battle would spawn at the same location. World events that have you raid convoys will run through world events that spawn bosses. Or hell, world events are handled so badly that there was one story quest where the game spawned 2 different events on top of each other in the middle of a boss fight, leaving us fighting 4 goddamn bosses at a time! You seriously cannot make up incompetence of this magnitude! I had several plunders where random other ships happened to spawn in the area and joined in to where plunders just went on forever. What garbage tier dropout morons do you have to be not to realize that randomly dropping hordes of huge enemies at all times to constantly derail players was a bad idea? The cherry on top is that a lot of the bosses are explicitly designed for co-op, meaning that you can just innocently wander into an enemy that will pulverize you or render a mission unwinnable. Yeah, thanks, you stupid shit. To the game's credit, each new expansion has also added at least one new questline and story campaign to give the game some legs. Were the expansions at least interesting? Season 1! Raging Tides! A bunch of plague ships run by some guy called La Peste show up, so you run a few basic missions killing La Peste's men, who never leave you alone once you kill one. And after maybe an hour, you're thrown into a final battle with La Peste, which is cartoonishly impossible. The dude has well over a dozen respawning ships for backup at all times, has a health bar longer than War and Peace, and can poison your ship to where you take shitloads of damage. I think the devs freaked out that there wasn't much to do in multiplayer at launch, so they added a raid boss that absolutely requires at least 10 players or so. Season 2! Chorus of Havoc! The French send 2 advanced ships to mess with the pirates, so the helm sends you on a ton of missions killing the French and fighting the new bosses one at a time. This was stymied for us because a crucial item glitched not to appear in our inventories for 2 days straight. There's an annoying level where you pilot a small boat to commandeer a ship, kill a boss, and then immediately die and start over because the section of the map you're allowed to sail inside abruptly changes. One of the bosses, the game marked the wrong location for where to fight him, and when the Armand Hubach fight finally launched, it dropped in the exact same spot as a sea monster battle. And then a second sea monster battle tried to interrupt us. And after about 4 hours of padding, we had to quit this questline too, because it wants you to go fight La Peste again! The first season had almost no quests, so the second is so padded that it repeats boss fights. Season 3! Into the Dragon's Wake! A new Chinese captain shows up with a crapload of ships that use flamethrowers, so Rama sends you to fight them for a few hours until you fight a string of anonymous, piss-easy bosses. It just feels like padding. Eventually it comes out that the Chinese captain is fighting an evil Chinese emperor, but you kill her anyway and Rama makes a treaty with the emperor, only it turns out the Chinese lady isn't dead and has unexplained magic powers or some shit. She warns you that something is coming, because that's the pinnacle of cliffhangers. Something is coming. Maybe we'll fill in what later. They also added some repeatable one-and-done missions with a guy called Blackwood who will send you to attack some anonymous ships, because it turns out that single-use quests don't do shit to prop out a live service. Season 4! Shadows of the Deep! A dude named Vikram shows up with a cursed ship that's indestructible, so you run a bunch of fetch quests finding pieces of a jewel that'll render him vulnerable. Vikram actually gets a cool cutscene establishing mood, characters, stakes, and gravitas, but then his boss battle is supreme bullshit. Vikram nails you with a new status ailment that drains all your health and stamina, meaning his attacks are effectively one-shot kills. And he's still vastly less bullshit than La Peste is. What's funny is that this season has a second questline where you track down orbs that lay out Vikram's backstory, only we did this discovering of his backstory after we had already defeated Vikram, you dumbass game! And for all the mystery and weight placed upon the guy, His entire history is the Dutch took his wife and now he's pissed. That's it! Still, Season 4 is the closest the game has gotten to having an actual story or characters. So, progress? And while I was in production on this episode, Ubisoft announced the beginning of Year 2 of expansions. Year 2. For a game that's lucky to crack a triple-digit player count on a daily basis. Year 2 began on April 15th, 2025 with Season 1, Ascent into Chaos. You go on copy-pasted one-off missions killing the French and the Dutch in ships that take forever to spawn, and after 2 hours I got assigned to do a plunder that was never marked as available to plunder. This expansion has zero story whatsoever. Two companies are vaguely fighting in the background while you murder both sides, and that's it. The real story is all the changes that were made to the game's core systems as of the start of Year 2. The interface is now vastly uglier and less useful. Your screen is now cluttered with tons of obnoxious mission reminders at all times. Inventory management takes longer now that menu options take a full second to fade in whenever you select an item, and weapons can now be upgraded in the name of extending the game's grind. Helm wares that did nothing can now be sold for cash, because we needed more items that do that, and the helm itself has been utterly nuked into being just north of useless. Now there are half the smuggling jobs, less than half the supply runs, and manufactories can't be upgraded unless you buy a shitload of other upgrades first, locking tons of stuff that used to be free behind ever more massive grind walls. And according to user reviews, this isn't even the first time that Ubisoft has jacked up the grind. Oh, and instead of the premium currency that actually does stuff, you can assign your manufactories to make random crafting supplies that barely do shit. Cause the game's whole 5 hardcore players had too much money, so now you just make less money. I swear, just out of spite, the game now drops a hostile fleet next to every freaking outpost so I can't heal, fast travel, or quit without a fight. Oh, and they added World Ascension, a second unlockable difficulty that's harder than normal. I briefly tried the second tier of the game world, and it was a living hell. Even the tiny fisherman ships in the starting area have weapons strong enough to wreck you, and the only loot I got for my trouble was a few upgraded weapons that were worse than the equipment that I needed to get here. Thanks! Oh, and another little update to the game that I didn't see mentioned or announced anywhere. The enemies can heal now. The enemies can pack healing weapons to where basic ships can be nigh impossible to kill. You have a game that can't retain users because it plays like crap, so you make enemies harder to kill. How is it that almost every single change just made the game worse? Ubisoft put out a developer talk hyping up the rest of their plans for Year 2. The entire story is going to be a war between the French and the Dutch, which sounds boring as hell, and you can pick an alignment serving one of the countries, which doesn't even sound like something pirates should do. What am I saying? Ubisoft made a story about fighting the big evil corporations, then grew self-aware and made it about joining the big evil corporations. They're adding officers that you can recruit to tweak your stats, large ships with more guns to extend the grind even further, and Season 3 is due to finally add land combat with swords and pistols. And before you get excited, the work-in-progress footage of land combat looks like mindless button mashing, like a brief minigame that's only being added to make players shut up about it. They're also adding new versus modes because the game still can't pick one lane and stick with it. None of these updates sound like things that'll actually fix the game. The one thing I was excited for was rebalancing the helm, and they just made it orders of magnitude worse. The game is still boring, repetitive, poorly balanced, and bugged out the ass. Making everything you do take longer doesn't fix that.
But I mean, Ubisoft is pushing forward with Year 2, and I just the asshole that doesn't get it? Miles, Schnick, you both played Skull and Bones with me. What did you guys think of the game? Okay, Will either of you care to elaborate?
Nothing. That's the best way I can describe this game. Nothing. Marvel's Avengers, Kill the Justice League. Those games at least started with something of substance before they devolved into a worthless grind. Skull and Bones starts with the worthless grind. There is no story here. It may pretend to have interesting characters and lore, but it doesn't. None of these idiots are actual characters. They're empty shells used to give you content. And what is that content? 99% of the time, it's just go here and kill shit. Over and over and over and over again. And you don't even get the satisfaction of getting stronger ships and equipment for too long. After a few hours at most, you've already got the strongest ship you're probably ever going to get. And you'll get a good weapon or piece of equipment maybe once in a blue moon. Probably after grinding like 10 levels of the stupid battle pass. Yeah, on paper you can upgrade your ship, but each upgrade is locked behind hours upon hours of grinding out materials that are made annoying to get on purpose. Some of them locked behind overpowered outposts that shred you to pieces, and others you have to refine from already existing materials that in themselves are annoying to grind for. And what do you get for all your trouble? A small sliver of a boost that makes your ship maybe like a quarter of a knot faster, or maybe it helps withstand one extra cannonball more than usual. Joy! All these factions, all these refineries, all these currencies you can earn, all these outposts you can plunder, all these treasures you can find, they all amount to nothing. Because almost every mission in this game is too damn easy. You pretty much never feel like you're progressing anything. Playing this game is being trapped in an endless loop of sailing the same damn ship, destroying the same damn enemy ships, collecting the same damn materials, over and over. Well, except for the rare occasion where you get to fight sea monsters, which usually aren't even hard. They're just annoying with how much they hide under the water. And once or twice, you get a boss ship like La Peste, who's just cartoonishly impossible to beat. Go through an endless grind wall of never feeling like you're getting any stronger, just to feel like you have a shot at this one boss who's probably not even going to give you anything meaningful. It's seriously like a placebo medicine that a quack doctor would give you. I vividly remember Jado describing the post-story content of Marvel's Avengers as playing Marvel's Avengers for the sake of playing Marvel's Avengers. And having experienced Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League with both him and Miles, we reached playing Kill the Justice League for the sake of playing Kill the Justice League the moment the lazy as hell story expansion started. Skull and Bones? Simply booting the game up! You're already playing Skull and Bones for the sake of playing Skull and Bones. There is literally nothing original or unique this game offers you. I fully commit to the idea that this game is just a tax scam for Ubisoft executives to go on a friggin' paid vacation, with shit like that quadruple A game label being made up on the spot as a stupid buzzword. There's a whole nother year of content coming, supposedly with stuff like land combat, but I guarantee you, it's not going to have any depth. It's not going to change up the gameplay loop. It's not going to change anything. It is legitimately sad that this game made me miss Kill the Justice League. At least we could have had dance parties there.
Skull and Bones is just about the most lifeless and dull and uninspired world that is centered around pirates. None of the characters stand out. Nothing about the world stands out. Just about everything is so boring and has no passion. Characters like Skurlock and Rama just make me want to take a nap every time they open their mouths. What this game got me thinking about, however, though, is how do you make a pirate world interesting? Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. And yes, I am saying trilogy because movies 4 and 5 were just a fever dream. But that whole trilogy is a prime example of how pirates can feel both fresh and interesting. Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, that one performance has more energy and more life than the entirety of Skull and Bones. Johnny Depp is super quippy, quotable, and just freaking hilarious, all of which go into making Jack Sparrow such an endearing character. Skull and Bones has the Dutch, the French, La Peste, and the Hubach twins. That's about all I can really remember, because none of those villains have any distinguishing features whatsoever. Captain Barbossa has the supreme hamminess of Geoffrey Rush in the first film. Davy Jones has Bill Nighy's menace and the way he throws himself into the role. Lord Cutler Beckett also gives off a fun British bad guy role in the same vein as Grand Moff Tarkin. Finally, Skull and Bones has no memorable music outside of one song that plays in the main menu. Junkie XL, who's done a lot of movies, but he really dropped the ball here. Nothing about the music when you hear it in isolation will scream, oh hey, that's Skull and Bones. Now Hans Zimmer, on the other hand, his music not only gives weight to every scene, but the music is also itself instantly iconic and will make you think of the trilogy when you hear it. The music just really does draw you into the world. Skull and Bones has nothing going for it. It's boring, and its story is so drawn out and yawn-inducing that I tuned out during every cutscene. This universe should just die, but Ubisoft won't let it, because it's a freaking tax scam.
I recognize that this video has mostly been aimless rambling, but it's not my fault. Skull and Bones is just a series of random fights and storefronts hurled into an open world with the bare minimum to pass for campaigns tacked onto it to look like an actual game. I could only stay engaged with this game if I had a project. The second I had finished said project, I had zero trouble dumping this thing like a stone. So that begs the question, did I like anything in the game? Past dressing my pirate in a flamboyant purple pimp jacket and matching hat? Or naming my pirate ship the Greater Fox to spite Crystal's ex-boyfriend? Okay, one actual cool experience, and it's not even to do with the actual game design. Some world events will spawn a convoy of ships that you can raid for lots of money and rare items, and if somebody sees a convoy, it's player etiquette to put out the call for help, which alerts the whole server so that everyone can dogpile the convoy and everyone gets a copy of the loot. It's just this cool player interaction that formed organically and is a genuinely fun experience when it happens. Also, the game's theme song by the band Home Free is really good. It doesn't play anymore as of year 2. And the song is copyrighted, so I can't even play it for you. Everything else about this game is a steaming hot mess, and the most boring world and gameplay for a pirate game that I could have possibly imagined.
If only Ubisoft had an actual good pirate game to use as a reference!
From outcast a kingpin was born upon the sea. There was meant to walk the land, a pirate's life for me. Avast ye whining up the sails, don't speak to mutiny. Find yourself a wanton quarter, bottom of the sea. Among the shoals of Saint and to the eastern shores, I'll take my chances on the winds and loot and plunder scores. Our flag, it stands for us alone and no one else around. We owe our honor to the sea and not to any crown. Yo ho, the seas forever roll. Yo ho, the winds forever blow. Long after I've met Davy Jones, till I'm not but skull and bones. Yo ho.
You know the sad part? That was the Wii U version. Looks about as good as Skull and Bones on PS5.
Actually, as much as everybody talks about Black Flag being a decade old and the much better game, it plays a key role in Skull and Bones' development, because the game actually began life as a multiplayer expansion for Black Flag back in 2013.
Yes, 11 years. And that's not even a Ubisoft record. We are never getting beyond Good and Evil 2.
According to a Kotaku expose, Skull and Bones had an endlessly revolving door of creative leads and executives running its development, and every time the senior staff rotated out, the game would pretty much start over. At various points, there were meant to be land missions, playing as the ship itself instead of a captain, Fantasy settings, different locales, varied PvP multiplayer modes, stealth mechanics, survival mechanics, even the crafting system and the overworld that are the core of the final game were up in the air constantly throughout development. Management knew that they wanted a multiplayer pirate ship game, and that's it. As of Kotaku's article in 2021, developers still had no idea what the game was going to look like. And given the hard shifts in art and story direction for year 2, I think the game is still shifting directors a year after launch. Management was also reported to be surrounded by sycophantic yes-men that blocked any and all input from the actual staff, which, combined with the fact they had dick to show for 8 years of work, led to mass departures from the studio. So why wasn't the Nightmare production just cancelled outright? Because of contractual obligations. Skull and Bones was developed out of a new Ubisoft studio in Singapore under a deal with the Singapore government. Ubisoft set up the studio and funded it with hefty tax breaks and subsidies in exchange for developing a new IP with Singapore talent. If Ubisoft cancelled Skull and Bones, this contract would be null and void, and Ubisoft would have had to pay back the mountains of tax breaks they'd been given to make the studio. You know what this means?
Skull and Bones only exists because it's a tax scam.
The game was pushed out as a bare-bones barren shell, replete with missing features, the most cut-down and generic experience possible, just to fulfill a contract. And even then, the game was delayed 6 times. And that's only the stuff that's explicitly on the record. According to the people of Singapore, things are so much worse than even that grim picture. According to an archived Reddit thread, so grain of salt here, Ubisoft used the studio as a glorified beach house for executives, sending them down to run Skull and Bones as something just north of a paid vacation. And when an executive got too toxic and prompted public investigations, they'd be called back to Paris and the next shithead executive in line for a vacation would take over. The people of Singapore have also complained that Ubisoft does only the bare minimum to uphold the government's demands, hiring locals only to keep them in the absolute lowest positions while abusing the shit out of them. All in all, Skull and Bones is said to have lost $200 million, which has to be industry code because Avengers and Suicide Squad were both said to have lost exactly $200 million as well, and Ubisoft has admitted the thing is never going to turn a profit. The game is just barely cracking 100 players a day on Steam, and as lucky to pull in half the player numbers as Suicide Squad, which is already dead. And yet, Ubisoft is pushing forward with Year 2 of expansions for the game that nobody is playing. I can only assume that Ubisoft has to keep pumping out updates to satisfy the contract with Singapore, and given the lousy state of Year 2, I genuinely think that Ubisoft is trying to kill the game on purpose to try and get out of its contract. At time of recording, Ubisoft is drowning in debt, shedding investors, courting a buyout from the Chinese, and desperately restructuring to try and look like everything's not on fire. They can't afford to keep developing Skull and Bones, but thanks to their own scuzzy practices backfiring, they also can't afford to stop. And the fact that the game's mere existence is a continual self-owning troll on one of the worst companies around is pretty much the only legitimately good thing about it.
So me bullies, bottoms up, raise the sails and drink with me. Here's to us, live long and long live piracy. Bring around into the wide if treasures to be found. A pirate's life and nothing else till the ship she's going down. Yo ho, the sea's forever.